What's up, guys? Tim Alston with DragBoss Garage. Welcome, everybody. This is going to be an epic live chat with Joe Pappas. So I'm glad everybody's here. I see people in the house already. AJD, JMR, Bill Fioretti. He won't be here, but thanks. I'll ask those questions to Joe when we get to that point. But I want to give a big shout out to my family, Andrea, Izzy, and Elena. Thank you guys for supporting me in this endeavor. Also, thank you for Joe and his family to be here. I think we'll start it out like this. One of the things when you think about Chrysler Pro Stock history, you know, I'm looking at it in two different sections. We'll say 70 to 72 and then 73 on. Now, in 72, they had the Motown Missile. And I think I was even confused when I first started looking at this stuff because Joe and I had talked a year ago and made a little bit of a video. But the issue that we had was, and it may even pop up tonight, he lives in way high hills of Michigan with probably 6 feet of snow. So the internet's not the best and the streaming doesn't work well. So I said, hey, I'll buy a different camera. We'll try that and see if that works better. And we tried it the other day, but it was still not the best. So Joe went out and got a laptop computer for this. So his wife did, Lynn. Big shout out to you, Lynn. Thank you for doing this so that we could have this live chat and record history. I appreciate that. So back in the day, from what I read in the 69 range, we'll say, in Detroit, Woodward Avenue, you know, where all the hotbed of high performance was. The factory was there and all their cars, and what they wanted to show off, some stealthy, some not. But the story goes, and I got a lot of this from Geoff Stunkard, his book. If you guys are Mopar fanatics, you've got to get this book. You know, I'm a Ford guy, but once I started reading that, I couldn't put it down because the history and the documentation just blows me away. And this is what Joe's going to tell us about. So in 69, Ted Spear, he did all the engines for these cars, the Pro Stock cars, or at least one of the main guys that did the engines. Now there's a Texaco station where Jimmy Addison worked. And the car that pops out the best is a Silver Bullet, a 67 Coronet, I think it was, with a Hemi in it. 4 mufflers. I remember seeing it on one of these shows. One of the collectors had it. The thing was running like 10s back then on the street. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of start from that point of what Joe remembers, because Joe was not with Don Carlton at that time, nor was Don Carlton, I don't think. He was with Mike Fonz, I think. So Joe, let's go ahead and we'll.
All right. Well,
we'll start with that. We got 20 people. I'll leave the floor to you.
All right. I grew up in Royal Oak, Michigan, right near 12 Mile in Woodward. And my memories of Woodward Avenue were street racing back in the early mid 60s and cruising on Woodward Avenue. Yep. Jimmy Addison, at that point, I didn't know who Jimmy Addison was.
Okay.
There were a lot of different cars that you would always see on Woodward Avenue, and there were Mopars and Ford and GM products. And I kind of grew up in a Ford family, so that'll probably make you happy, Tim. But my mom was an employee of Ford Tractor Division.
Oh, wow.
And she worked there for many, many years until she retired. She worked in engineering at Ford Tractor. Any rate, I grew up there. So the Woodward scene is what drew me in. And I grew up with friends, and one of my best friends was a guy named Dave Dickinson. His sister, Patty, dated Mike Fonz, and eventually they got married. And that is how I became involved in racing, essentially because of Patty and Dave and Mike. And so being friends with Mike, I knew that he raced, and he had an old, I think it was a 61 409 Biscayne that he used to drag race.
Yep.
And then he bought a 57 Corvette from a guy named Dave Bieneman. And the name Bieneman might be, somewhat not known to a lot of people because of Matt Bieneman, MBE
Yes.
cylinder
Yeah.
head. Yeah.
I know him well.
Well, Dave grew up in Royal Oak. And over the years, Dave built me a couple of engines for hot rods that I had. A 57 or I'm sorry, a 55 Chevy. And, I had two different motors set aside for that. And one was a small block, one was a big block. And Dave did those motors. But, and Matt was probably not even born yet, to tell you the truth. Any rate, I grew up there, met Mike, and eventually hanging around his house, he put me to work, and I helped paint a street race car that he had, a 57 Chevy with 427 in it, which he got from Dave Bieneman. And the story goes that, and I know this is a fact, Mike was featured on a segment of a TV program called, oh goodness, it was the precursor for 60 Minutes. I think it was called First Tuesday. And they did a segment on street racing on Woodward Avenue. And they rode along with Mike one night in this car that I had painted. And so that kind of, that and other things cemented a good relationship with Mike. When the time came in 1970, it was late 1970, he got this rod shop deal. He had already raced a year of pro stock and had already raced in, I think it was a modified production with his Camaros, and done very well on a national basis, and got the rod shop deal, and he needed some assistance in building the car. His brothers would help. I spent the whole winter working with him between 70 and 71. The car was kind of finished up in the spring, and I went back to a job that it was a seasonal job I had. I was in school at the time, in college. And later in the year, he came to me and asked me if I wanted to go full time. His brother, one of his brothers didn't want to do it anymore. And so I stepped in. And obviously, I mean, certainly the first race that we went to together as me as an employee was the World Finals in 1971. And guess what? Mike wins. So he became the Pro Stock World Champion in 1971. And in a car that I helped him build. And that particular Dodge Challenger was a clone to the Motown Missile Dodge Challenger. Our Mike's shop, which was at his home at the time, was only about maybe 3-4 miles away from Ted Spihar's shop. And Ted allowed Mike to come over there, take measurements, get all the information. And the car was essentially built to as close to a clone of the Missile as you could possibly have. And it was a very good car, as a matter of fact, and it was very successful for Mike. That car was raced in 1971, and we updated it to a 72, and he raced it again in 72. And a lot of match racing, a lot of stuff with NHRA, and a little bit of IHRA, but mostly NHRA. And match racing. And then at the end of 72, it became very clear that Mike's littlest brother, Kenny, was going to want to work. And I think Mike went and talked to Don Carlton and said, hey, if you need a guy, Joe's available. And Don did need a guy. And so basically he said, okay, on January 1st, you go over to Spihar's shop and you're going to work with Don and Dick. And that was at the point that the Mopar missile emerged, the Duster.
So 73, we're talking.
Yeah, January of 73.
Let me stop you there, Joe. So
okay.
Maybe you weren't aware of it, but the internet, whether it was on your side or I think it was mine, went away. So we were totally out of the air. I was tripping. So somehow it came back and it's working. So sorry, guys. So there's a big area where we didn't hear that part, which is okay.
I apologize. It was probably here because we're out in the middle of nowhere, and the internet out here is a little bit spotty at times. Yeah.
I was like tripping. I was like, oh my God, this ain't good. But we got faith. Keep the faith. That's what it says right here.
I can hear your voice though. That's the thing.
So if we go off the air, I'll just keep talking.
Okay.
And it'll come back.
But at any rate, the Motown missile. I'll go back and start talking about the Motown missile. There were technically 6 missile cars, and people really probably only recognized the first 3, which were the Challenger, which ran in 1970 and 1971. It just updated the tail panel and the nose of the car. The 72 Barracuda, which is really a very, very pretty car. It wasn't the most successful of the cars, but it was a transitional car because it was built with I think 3 different rear suspensions that you could swap out, and it was the first car to use the 396. In other words, a D-stroke 427, and it was a test bed, and they were all test beds, but it was the stepping stone to the 73 car, which was the Butler built chassis that was successful, the Duster. At the end of 72, it was Chrysler had wanted to separate the program a little bit, and they made Don the essentially the owner of the car, and he was in charge of running the test program. Ted Spehar continued to build motors, but Ted's shop was doing other work for Chrysler, the race group, at the same time. So it made a lot of sense for Teddy to build the motors and supply us with all the engines. And if we needed assistance at a test, either Ted or Len Bardish would come to the test and take care of motor duties. Otherwise, it was up to me to change the bearings and to do the motor maintenance and lash the valves and do whatever. So at that point, Spehar's place was called, I think they changed the name to Specialized Vehicles. Don's company was called Carlton Enterprises.
Yep.
And Carlton Enterprises was now the driver of the test program. Well, it also made a lot of sense to change the name of the car to Mopar Missile because our funding came through what used to be known as Performance Brian Schramm, which became Direct Connection in 1973, I think, or about that time frame. And so that's where the monies came through, as I understood it. So what we did is the name of the car was changed to Mopar Missile, and the Motown Missile Barracuda Teddy sold eventually to Mike Fonz, and Mike ran the car under the name Motown Missile in 73 after he lost his rod shop deal. And then I think around 74, or thereabouts, he bought Irv Barringhouse's old Pro Stock car that was a Butler built. No, it was a Kent Fuller, Dick Landy built car. And he raced that until he quit racing, I think maybe at the end of 74 or sometime in 75. I might be wrong on that. But at any rate, our program took off, and it was Oldfield, myself, and Don Carlton. We worked out of a separate shop about 2 miles from where Ted Spihar's shop was.
Yep.
And our job was to, take care of the car, to get it to all the tests, to do all the testing from the car side. And as a new car was coming online, Dick and I took and did whatever we had to do with the cars. And quite honestly, 1973 was a really, really good year for Mopar in Pro Stock, and for us especially, because that 73 Butler built car was probably, it was certainly the most successful on the track performance wise in competition of any of those cars. It won the IHRA championship. And if my memory is correct, we lost 2 IHRA races. We were runner-up. We won all the rest of them. And every time that car hit the track in an IHRA race, it lowered the ET and mile an hour record. It was a pretty phenomenal car. It was the first car to run officially in a sanctioned body in the 8-second bracket.
Wow.
Which was a pretty substantial goal and a pretty substantial milestone. It happened at Rockingham, and some drunk guy came up to me after the race and wanted to thank us because he won $10,000 on a bet saying the car was going to run in the 8s, and it did. So I'm glad that he won money. He didn't give us any beer and he didn't give us any money, but he was happy. He was really happy. At any rate, that car was a very, very good race car. And we did win the Spring Nationals for NHRA at Columbus.
Yep.
And we were runner-up at Pomona. But I think in 1973, we only raced 4 NHRA races. Pomona. I think we did go to Gainesville. We went to Englishtown, and we went to Indy. Oh, so we raced 5 because we did go to Columbus. So we raced 5 races, and that's it. We're runner-up at Pomona, and we won at Columbus. So, we didn't have much of a IHRA or an NHRA record for that year, but you got to remember we were saddled with weighing 7.25 pounds per cubic inch, and that car weighed close to 3,000 pounds going down the track, and it was difficult. Our relationship with NHRA over the years was rocky, to say the best. And NHRA, they did what they did for, I'm sure they thought were good reasons. Keep adding weight to the Chryslers to slow them down so that the competition could compete. But, when you get into a pro class, it should be, in my mind, heads up, everybody runs the same weight. Everybody, so many pounds per cubic inch, if that's the thing, and have at it. If you can't keep up with it, then you shouldn't be there.
See ya.
Yeah. And in all fairness, I mean, there was some great competition. I mean, the Jenkins cars were always fast. the Ford cars really came on. Once they started messing with the weight brakes, the competition got skewed over toward first the Chevrolet side, and then much to NHRA's chagrin, then to the Ford side. And they did, I have to say, and I'm probably going out on a limb here, they didn't care for Ford either.
Right.
And when Glidden won all those championships and won race after race, I could just feel it in my bones that Wally Parks and the rest of the contingent at NHRA, they weren't happy.
So let me ask you this. So let's use the 73 car. Okay. I love that car, by the way.
Yeah.
But when you went to the track, it sounds like you had to change the bearings after a couple runs, the way you're talking, at least with testing. What was the maintenance on those cars?
Yeah. We would typically change the bearings every 10 to 12 runs.
Okay.
And, but on the other hand, when we went to a race, we usually had 2 to 3 engines. So I didn't have to change bearings at a race.
3 engines,
typically,
you
said? I would. We would typically have 3 engines,
okay.
1 in the car and 2 spares.
Okay.
And they were fully dressed and ready to go. And so we didn't really have to change bearings at the racetrack. It was normally just on a test. If we were on the road for, like, if we were in let's say Gainesville after the race in Gainesville, and we were going to test for 3 or 4 days, I'd probably have to change bearings on one of the motors, or a couple of the motors. Or in California, in 73, I think we were in California for 5 weeks. There was a couple rainouts there, as I recall. And so the race ended up actually happening 3 weekends after the original race was scheduled, or 2 weekends after. So that happens, and so you just go back and test some more, and so bearings had to be changed, but it wasn't a big deal. I mean, it's not that hard, and Teddy Spihar was very specific on how you did things, and I had a little book, and my book told me exactly what I needed to do in what order. And I followed it because that's what Ted wanted. And, Ted still is a great guy, and God bless him. I had no problem doing it. And you know what? He was right. You do it right, and you never regret what you did. So
nice.
So at any rate, the 73 car, again, was just a really terrific car. And it was during 73 that the Mitsubishi car, in other words, the Dodge Colt, was showing up. And so it was discussed, and we decided to build a Dodge Colt. But there was also another program going on within the race group at Chrysler to run the D5 Hemi, which was essentially a totally different engine. And there's others that know the architecture better than I, but it was definitely different. The parts weren't interchangeable. There might have been another bolt that was, but not much else. Okay. And so we built a Dodge Colt that would accommodate the D5. And it required some changes to the front of the car, the down tubes going to the chassis from the roll cage. They had to be tilted out a little bit further, and so that because the exhaust port angles, I think, were different, and so on and so forth. There's a bunch of people that know it better than I do. any rate, so we built that, and it was built by Dan Knapp, the chassis. And then he sent it to us, and Dick and I were too busy to do the tin work and the on the car. So we sent it to, I drove it out to Ron Butler's in California.
Yep.
And I dropped it off, left a trailer sitting there, and left the pickup truck and flew back home. And it was out there for about 4 months. And after Bristol that year, I went to pick it up. But I think about by the time I got back to Detroit with the car, the D5 engine program was pretty much abandoned.
Okay.
They let Dick Landy go ahead and do some more development on it, I think, but we never ran it with the D5. And as a matter of fact, I think at that point, NHRA stepped in and said, we will never allow a Dodge Colt to run a Hemi in pro stock, period. So don't even think about bringing that car to the track to run in pro stock.
Were they that blatant? Like they laid the law down, bam, that's how it is?
They did. And honestly, Tim, it was, I mean, I was a little bit shocked because I know that, you know, stuff costs a lot of money. Chrysler invested a lot of time and effort in the D5 program and in the Colt program, building the car. And so what I did is I took the car down to Schramm's. We called it Schramm's instead of Performance Parts or Direct Connections. And I unloaded the car, and they picked it up with a forklift and stuck it on the fourth shelf of one of these giant warehouse, shelving units. And it sat there until later, till Don moved back to North Carolina. But we were done with that car, and talk began immediately, because this is now mid to late 1973, about what we were going to do in the future. And it was decided that we were going to try to build a small block pro stock car that would compete heads up with Bill Jenkins and the Ford products. And so the wheels started moving toward that. So what Dick and I did is took one of Don Carlton's match race cars. He had two, I think, at the time. It was a Dart Sport, and we gutted the car. I think we ripped the floor out of it. We ripped, all we kept was the shell of the car. And in, I think it was about 90 days, we built a new car in Troy based on that. And we all called it the yellow test car because we painted it yellow. And that car still exists, by the way. I know where it is now. But it was a very, very lightweight version of a pro stock car, because we needed to get the weight way, way down, close to 2,000 pounds. Okay. And so Dick and I built that car. We sent it over, I think, to Tiganelli's to be painted. But we painted the chassis and the inside of the car with Emron. And actually, we painted the outside of the car with Emron too, because, that stuff you could use lacquer thinner to clean the car. And a test car has issues. It's going to blow up motors. It's going to blow up everything that could blow up. And, just the rubber alone, the buildup was, you have to clean it somehow. And a scraper and lacquer thinner work pretty good. So, any rate, that car became a test car in 1974. And most people kind of forgot about the Missile at that point, because there was no car that raced in 1973, known as the Mopar Missile. I'm sorry, 1974, that ran as the Mopar Missile. Dick and I devoted the entire year to testing. It was testing the yellow car. So Don would compete in IHRA and do match races with the other one of his match race cars. And it had the paint scheme of the old Mopar Missile on it, but instead of Mopar Missile, it said Don Carlton. And there was actually two of those cars built simultaneously in over the winter of 73, 74 by Don and Clyde in North Carolina, while Dick and I were working up in Michigan. And one of those cars is being restored right as we speak, and it's in Western Michigan. And it'll be beautiful when it's all done. And it'll say Don Carlton, and it'll have the missile paint scheme. Nice. But at any rate, the test program went pretty good. The car was pretty fast. It was certainly competitive with the times, the 8-second times that the Ford and the Chevrolet products were running. And we thought that we were in a pretty good position to move forward into 1975. During the year of 74, Chrysler had a new car, a chassis built by Dan Knapp, who had built the Colts. And Dan, if for Mopar people, they know who Dan was. He was involved with the Ram Chargers in the days when they ran the Dragster, the top fuel car. And Dan was a very, very good builder. And he and his younger brother built this chassis, which for the car that became known as the wire car. Right. And this was a car that was essentially designed at Chrysler Corporation on a computer. But remember, computers back in those days were crude compared to what we have today. We work in solids, and you could virtually design darn near anything, just get the right software, and you can do it on a PC. But back in those days, it took quite an effort to build this car in the computer. And they built a stick model, and they tested every element of the stick model for torsional rigidity and trying to maximize weight savings. So Dan Knapp fabricated this chassis, and the reason it's called the wire car is because the chassis essentially ends right over the shock mounts for the rear end. The chassis beyond that is really, really like 049 tubing, probably 1.5 inches. Two strut bars run back from there, and then there's a cross piece under the where the tail lights are. That holds up the floor, but there's two wires that are under tension that are crisscross and attached to each corner back there to hold the back of the car up.
Wires.
Yeah. Steel wires. Maybe 1/4 inch in diameter. Yep. Yeah. And they got a turnbuckle on them so you can tune it and get it nice and tight. And that's what holds the car together back there. And the car, it used a lot of titanium. The entire front suspension, every nut and bolt in the car, all the bracketry, the pedals, the third member was the centerpiece was a magnesium centerpiece. It used bolt-on axle tubes that were titanium. All the rear suspension was titanium. The wheelie bars were titanium. The and it used a full floater rear end, which was kind of unusual. That wasn't normally seen in a pro stock car back then, but we had a full floater rear end. And the front brakes are snowmobile brakes, believe it or not. And the pucks are about 1.25 inches in diameter. They're really tiny. And the rears, I think, were Hurst Earhart brakes, 2-piston calipers. Yep. But the car, the target was to make a car that weighed 2,000 pounds. Well, Adam was the engineer at Chrysler, part of our race group that it was in charge of that. And he did a spectacular job with that car. And it came in, and I know for a fact, because it's out in my shop right now, that car weighs, ready to race, 1,850 pounds.
Wow.
Today.
Wow.
That's pretty lightweight.
Yeah.
But it's, and the torsional rigidity of that car and the safety of that car far exceeded anything that NHRA had at the time. Unfortunately, it didn't follow the letter of their rule book. And they heard about the car. NHRA heard about the car and basically told Dick Maxwell at the time, as it was told to me, that car will never, ever be able to race at an NHRA event, period. Don't bring it because we're going to send you home. At that point, the decision was made within Chrysler Corporation to wash their hands of a formal pro stock program. And they told us all that, hey, this is going away and it's time to do something else. So what we did is we moved all the equipment in the Michigan shop to North Carolina.
Yeah.
And Don had asked me to move down there and to be part of his program, because he was going to continue and he's going to run, as everyone knows, he ran Comp Lemonade. He also match raced in pro stock and then ran IHRA pro stock races. But I chose to go back to school, and I went and picked up my degree because I wanted to be like those Chrysler engineers. Okay. That I saw what they did. I realized that is just a phenomenal way to make a living. And so I went back to school and got my degree. And, many years later, I ended up back at SVI at one point, working, Ted had already left, and it was then owned by Mike Coran and Tom Coddington, who was one of the original Ram Chargers himself. Yeah. And worked there for 6 years and then went on to other things. And eventually I ended up retiring from Johnson Controls as an engineering manager. I did automotive stuff, but it was predominantly injection molding work. So my life took many, many turns. But while in my years at SVI, we were involved in building cars for PPG Industries for the IndyCar World Series. We built pace cars, Mopar pace cars, and some of them were pretty cool. One of them was used in a movie called The Wraith with Charlie Sheen. It was his first movie, and it's kind of one of these sci-fi movies with this weird mid-engine car, but that was one of the cars we had built at SVI. Wow. Yeah, and that car was in the museum at the Chrysler Tech Center out in Auburn Hills until they closed the museum. And then it's in storage somewhere. But those were good years. And but I never stepped away from hot rodding. I built a couple of hot rods for myself. I had a Ford Cobra, that I built. And right now I'm working on my old 49 Dodge pickup. It's a B1. It's essentially a half-ton pickup. But it's going to be a cool car. I've got a DeSoto Hemi in it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got, I hate to say this to my Dodge buddies, but it's got Corvette suspension, front and rear, C4 Corvette suspension. And I'm making some progress on it. Hope to get it into paint this year. So keep my fingers crossed on that.
They're crossed. We're going to feature that. We're going to feature that truck on DBG. We talked about that. That'll be a good subscriber bill.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And it'll be cool. So, I mean, in a nutshell, that's what happened to me over the years. I mean, there's like a million stories of things that happened on the road, things that happened while we were testing. People know that Don was killed in a testing accident on July 5th, 1977.
Yeah.
And that was quite devastating, I have to say. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's still hard to accept, but you know, accidents happen. And back then, you know, I don't know what you could have done to avoid that one. So
he was 36, guys. 36 years old.
Yep, he was. Yep. Luckily, you know, I still see his family in North Carolina, and I just spoke to his son Don about 2 weeks ago, and hopefully this winter, Lynn and I will be heading down south to, you know, go get warm, I guess, instead of watching all the snow.
Oh, yeah.
And we will definitely stop and stay with Don for a bit and visit with him, and probably continue down to where it's even warmer, so we can ride our mountain bikes and our road bikes and get some exercise in. You know, so
nice.
That's kind of what our plan is, at any rate.
Well, it's good to hear the story. You know, there's a lot of questions on here, and I'm going to start putting them up for us, and we'll see what we can find out. So there's a lot of people, you know, Ronnie Kirkpatrick.
I do.
Hi, Ronnie. It's good to see you. He's got a good question here, which I'm not sure about this one, but I read them out loud because a lot of guys put this on in the garage. Don't look at us because they're not much to see here, but listen to the story. So they don't know the questions that are coming up. But here's what he asks. Joe, tell them about the round tube, square tube deal.
Well, that could mean a couple different things. So I'll start in 1972. NHRA told us that you couldn't build a round tube chassis of any type in the pro stock cars.
Okay.
And when that was because Mr. Maxwell went to NHRA several months earlier and wanted to get a definition on that. Well, so we show up at Pomona, and essentially the 72 missile had, you know, essentially rectangular tubing kind of holding the stock suspension together, front and rear. And Jenkins shows up with a round tube chassis car. And he went right through tech, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, what just happened?" And so that was, you know, the start of it. Well, NHRA kept changing. You know, they tell us one week that you had to do something one way, and then the next week it had to be something different. And every time we went through tech, they would flag us for something, and they'd say, "Oh, we caught you guys cheating, right? You know, you had this on the car, and you can't have that." One of the things was the round tubes and the square tubes. if you had a round tube on the car, they'd say, "Oh, that's illegal. You can't have that," even though Jenkins had it. So if we put a square tube on it, they say, "Oh no, it has to be round tube." They just do anything to try to wreak havoc with us. And I think that's what Ron's talking about there, because he heard a story like that from Dick Oldfield. So, we played the game with them. And there is a story that goes along with going through tech. And the story is you always go to tech and have at least 3 things flagrantly wrong with the car.
Right. Yes.
But those are the things you don't want to run anyhow on the car. What you want are the things that aren't on the car yet. So what we would do is we would, you couldn't use an aluminum firewall, but the 73 car had a removable firewall, and we had 2. We had a steel one and we had an aluminum one. So we'd put the aluminum one on, for instance, and go through tech. And they'd stick a magnet there and they'd write the red tag saying that, you got to go get this fixed. But their own rules screwed them up, because when you got red tagged on something and they rejected your car, it was assumed that they checked everything. And so you go back and you fix what's wrong with the car and come back through tech, and they put the magnet on it and it works fine. But now I snuck 4 more things on the car that they didn't know before, and they can't retech the car. All they can check when you go back is the things that they red tagged. So we got around that a lot.
Nice.
I mean, there were tricks to all those pro stock cars back in. I think the big trick started in around 73. The cars would be narrowed in the front. The noses would be dropped. The glass would get laid back a degree or 2 more, and little aerodynamic tweaks to make the car, work better going down the track. The A-body car, the Duster, was always everybody said, well, why did you go away from the Barracuda and the Challenger? Because they were so pretty, and the Duster wasn't so pretty. Well, the Duster was about 4 or 5 inches narrower to begin with. And when you narrowed the front end and dropped it, it was a lot more aerodynamic than those other cars. And those were the big reasons we went to those cars. It wasn't because they were, I guess they sold pretty good. I mean, to, Granny and somebody needing a car for their children or something. But at any rate, they were just better. They made for a better race car. And of course, then we would move the wheels around, and NHRA wasn't sophisticated in those days. They didn't understand the tweaks that we were making. The one thing you just never, ever, ever did is park a real Duster next to a race car Duster, or a real Demon or Dart Sport next to a real to a race car Dart Sport, especially Landy's cars. They were pretty atrocious. Yeah. His noses were dropped even more than ours. But then, everybody did it. I mean, you looked at the Ford cars and they didn't, if you really got the tape measure out and you tried to watch body lines, the noses were dropped on those, and it was a good time. It was a fun time in pro stock, to tell you the truth. So I think, it was just, what Ron's asking about here is, the round tubes and square tubes. It was just, that was the tip of the iceberg when it came to NHRA, and they did not care for us.
It kills me that they just said, Grumpy, pass through, Grump, go ahead, card.
Yeah. And that got everybody off kilter, because back at that point, at the end of in the beginning of 72, I think most of the Ford products, about was they may have been there may have been a couple Pintos at that point, but
yeah.
Other than that, they were Mavericks,
Yep.
and those things were boats. I mean, they
Yep.
were big cars compared to the Maverick.
Pinto.
I'm sorry, compared to the Pinto.
Yeah.
And I know that we lost a dyno at Pomona in '73 when we went there, and I think I'm sure that dyno was running a Pinto at that time.
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure. And when it comes to guys, that guy was something phenomenal. He was just something else. He was just a great guy. He was just a good person to be around. He worked hard, and he was a fun person. Yeah, a lot of good guys. So it was a good. Get another question.
Yeah, I can't tell if you're talking or we're stuck, but let's see. Rick Norrington, good to see you, Rick. Thanks for being here. What was the bearing clearances on the rod and mains? Pretty loose? Do you remember any of that?
No, they weren't loose. They were. I thought my memory is they were pretty tight, but I don't remember the numbers. That was such a long time ago. You got to remember with the Hemis, there was those crankshafts were massive, and the rods that we used, we were still using steel rods back then, and those pistons are just heavy as can be, and you would just beat the tar out of those things, and you never wanted a Hemi to run under 90 psi oil pressure.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think our rod and main clearances were pretty tight.
There you go.
That would be a great question for Ted Spehar when he gets back from his Texas winter vacation.
You know what? Maybe we should get him on here to tell his story about the Hemi.
He might. Yeah, he might be glad to do that someday.
Yeah, I think we should.
I can work on him. I'll work on him this year.
All right. We got 83 people here now. That's wow. Great.
Terrific.
Let's see. Daniel Wilson. Tim, doing that thing that you do so very well. I'm late, but very glad to be here and bask in the glow of Joe Pappas. Wow. Now, he also contributed some money. Daniel Wilson gave $19.99. Tim, thanks for all you do. Stay tuned. More to come. That's my line right there. So I appreciate that. People contribute with money, which I either share with you or put in the DragBoss kitty to keep bringing this content to you, build the engines that I'm doing and all the work that I'm doing. So thanks, Daniel Wilson. We appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. That's really nice of Dan.
See, here we are. We were talking about that D5, and I saw that picture that you showed me. It's in the book where it has the Colt with a D5 on it.
Yeah.
The heads. And then that intake right there is sitting on top of it. And you can see the gap now, the difference space. I didn't notice that at first until you told me. I went back and looked at it.
Yeah, so everything was different with the D5. Now, for those Mopar guys, they know a guy named Steve Atwell. Steve has got a D5 in a Butler-built car that was done for the rod shop. It was built later in that queue of cars, of those Pro Stock cars.
Yep.
And I think the car was built for Bob Riffle.
Okay.
And it came out probably late in '73 or early '74. And that car, Steve owns it, and it was built for a D5. And he does have a D5 in it. Okay. And that's a massive piece of machinery sitting under the hood. Somewhere I may actually have a photo of that engine bay that I took at McCacken 2 years ago in Chicago. It's that car show in November, the weekend before Thanksgiving every year. And it was there. We had both the Missile cars there. We had a couple of Butch Leal cars there as well. And we had a really good weekend together. So
now Ronnie says that he has a D5. He said Dave Heights in North Carolina still builds them. Same bore as a Hemi, only low deck big block.
Yeah.
So there's
There
some
you
more
go.
information on it.
Yep.
Someone was asking about the Colt. You were talking about so what would NHRA allow the Colt to run in? Nothing, huh?
Well, not in pro stock.
Right.
The Colts, at least while I was still around, before I went back to school at the end of '74 and the beginning of '75, the Colts would run in comp eliminator. I know the Rod Shop had one, and I don't know if it ran the big block or the small block. I think it could accommodate either combination. I know that the Rod Shop Colt is, I think it's in Texas now, and I've talked to the owner of it, and he is in the process of getting ready to start the restoration, and he's redoing it with a Hemi.
Okay.
But I believe that car was first for, I think Bob had it for a while. I think Gene Dunlop drove it for a bit. But that car predominantly kicked around in modified production, or I'm sorry, in comp eliminator. It would have run some gas class or altered class. Like, in Don Carlton, when after he ran, he had a year at the Rod Shop with the Dart Sport. It was blue. It was the same car that I talked about earlier that was in one of his match race cars. It had the missile paint job on it with Don Carlton on the side instead of Mopar Missile. That car became the Rod Shop car. He won a championship in comp eliminator with that. And the Colt later they used one of Don's Colts, excuse me, and he built at least two that I'm aware of. He may have built three Colts after he was back in North Carolina, and as people know, he was killed in one of the Colts. And they were all very much altered wheelbase cars, so they would have been comp eliminator cars. And I think the week before Don passed away, he won at the Spring Nationals in a Colt.
Okay.
A week or two before he passed away in that accident. So Colts did run, but they weren't running NHRA Pro Stock. But our old Colt did run an IHRA Pro Stock and other match race stuff, and it was sold to the Belcher family and run by it'll come to me, but it was run by a guy that's real famous down in the South. That's what old age does to you, Tim.
Hey, it's catching up with me too. I'll tell you right now. I feel it every day.
But at any rate, that car still exists too. I mean, every one of our cars is somewhere. We know where they all are. And I had two of them here. I had the number 1 and the number 6 car. Arnie Clan owns both those cars, and Arnie lives in Nevada. And right after McCacken a year ago, he took the Challenger back to Nevada. And it really helped me out in a way because it opened up a space in my shop where I could get more work done on my own project. And so that car's back in Nevada, but he also owns the Wire car.
Okay. Yep.
And the 73 car is owned by a guy named Ben Donhoff, and he lives in Melbourne, Florida. The 72 car, the Barracuda, is owned by a guy named Mark Williamson and the family of his partner on that thing, a guy named Ebby Merritt. So his widow, he passed away. So Ebby's family is, has an equity in that car.
Mhm.
And it's currently being stored in Georgia.
Okay.
The yellow test car is in New York. The Colt is in Virginia, and that's about it. That covers them all. And I have the wire car, and so they're all accounted for.
It's nice to
It's
hear.
pretty amazing. They're all still,
I know.
alive. The yellow car needs a restoration, but the other cars are in good shape.
Nice.
Really nice.
Raging Bull 340. Man, so happy to hear about some Mopar Pro Stock. Thank you, DragBoss. You're welcome. And thank you, Joe Pappas, for being here. I appreciate it. We got a lot of people that want to say hi and thank you. Kelsey Donaldson, we stand an educated king. Yes, you are educated king.
Kelsey is my granddaughter.
Aha. There she is. Give me a shout out, Kelsey.
I love that girl.
Thanks for being here, Kelsey. Daniel Stuck. Tom Hoover lingered in the background until he linked up with Ray Barton. Tom grew up and retired 45 minutes from where I live. Nice. Very nice.
Yeah. Tom, when he left Chrysler, he went to work at General Electric, the locomotive division.
Okay.
And he was, I think, trying to get obviously more power out of those big locomotive engines. And I was back at SVI at that point. It was in the early 80s. And he was sending us cylinder heads from those locomotives to flow and to port and to play with. And Tom, he passed away, I think, in 15.
Okay.
And I think it was 15. But he was a phenomenal man, just one of the most intelligent guys in the universe. Really a nice man, very knowledgeable. I think his first degree was in physics, and he has subsequent degrees in engineering and so on and so forth. But what a gentleman and what a brilliant man. Yeah.
R.I.P. Tom Hoover.
Yeah.
David Beck. Go ahead. I worked for Joe for many years. You could not ask for a more quality human being than Joe. 2 thumbs up.
David's a very intelligent engineer, let me tell you.
Okay.
Dave is a great guy. I haven't seen him in a while, but we talked recently on the phone, and it's nice that he's watching this. And Dave's a smart guy, and he's got a few more years to work. So Dave, thanks for working and paying my Social Security. Appreciate it.
Well, because he's doing that, he says this: Joe, just will me the Corvette.
Ooh, you're going to have to fight Kelsey for that. There's a story that goes there.
What year vet are we talking?
What's that?
What year vet?
I have a 1980.
Okay.
It was the last of the L82 cars.
Yep.
And it's a cruiser. But I had it. I've had it since it was brand new. And I also had a Corvette in the 70s, which Mr. Hoover suggested that I sell. Dodge product. I bought a Dodge van after I sold that thing. But at any rate, the Corvette is a great car. And I had it at the same time I had a Cobra, an AC Cobra replica car, big block car. And Kelsey kind of was partial to the Cobra for a long time. And she was not happy with me when I sold it. Let's put it that way.
There it is.
But I think if I ever sold that Corvette, she'd definitely kill me. So yeah, I think Kelsey will end up with that Corvette. Either that or her brother Alex.
Sorry, David. Better luck next time.
Well, Dave can come and drive it if he wants.
Jerry Whaley, Joe, ever do any business with the now defunct Ghost Shop or Johnson Speed Warehouse in Lansing?
No, never did. I don't. No, I don't know either one of those businesses. So I can't help you there.
Let's see. This is Daniel Stuck. Jenkins' car used the stock unibody frame. The roll cage was a skeleton in the car. I can show you on my SRD car.
Well, yeah, that's nice. All I can say is when he showed up at Pomona in '72, that car was a complete chassis under the car. And it wasn't, it didn't meet the letter of the law that was written by NHRA at the time and imposed on us. Otherwise, we would have built that 72 car would have been vastly different. And, those cars kept morphing. Every new car that came out of there was a little bit different. So
here's what Ronnie says. Jenkins' 72 Vega was a back half car. The Petty Duster was the first full chassis. Then Jenkins built his 73 Vega full tube chassis.
There you go. Yeah.
Now, this is kind of interesting. From David Baxter. Tell the story of Donnie telling the kid to sell his shot because his sit won't be worth anything next week.
Oh, okay. I think this was 1975.
Okay.
And it was at Gainesville. Carlton was running that Don Carlton car in B altered, because a B altered car was essentially the same as a Pro Stock car. And so he ran the car in comp eliminator as a B altered, and the car didn't make weight. So, what do? Well, back in those days, you could only have so much bolt-in ballast. Sure. And it still wasn't heavy enough. So you fill the rocker panels or you take off the, and right in front of the rear wheels in the body sides, you put lead shot bags. Okay. You make sure they're leather ones, not cloth ones, because the cloth ones tear and drop BBs all over the track.
Okay.
He soundly beat this other competitor in B gas. I mean, just annihilated him. And it was a young guy, and he was very angry. I think he had a Camaro or a Corvette or something like that.
Yep.
And the tech, he complained to tech that there's, he's hiding weight in that car. I know he is. So they came over and they made Donnie take off all the panels on the inside of the car, and they found these shot bags. So they disqualified him. So Donnie was a very, very calm guy and very, very measured with what he said. And he was a true gentleman. But he went up to the young guy after this happened and said, well, I hope you're happy, because I'm going to suggest one thing to you, is that you go home and you sell that car immediately, because you won your class here at Pomona or at Gainesville. Great. God bless you. But that car's not going to be worth anything next event, because I'm going to take that record and destroy that record. Well, you'll never be able to run close to it. And the kid laughed at Donnie, and Donnie went out the next time and lowered the record, the national record, by a full second.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
And that did it. The guy had to get rid of his stuff, and his car wasn't worth anything. It's a B gas car. So
Nice.
that's what the story's about. Yeah.
What goes around comes around.
Yeah. I mean,
Nice.
and Donnie was still letting off the gas. You know, I mean, yeah. I mean, pound per pound, it's pretty hard to beat a Hemi. You know, if you had a 2,800 pound car that with a big block Chevrolet in it, running, you know, and a Hemi, the Hemi's going to beat it every time. As long as, you know, given equal chassis and stuff like that, the Hemi's just going to overpower it. So, and that's what people don't understand about the competitiveness of a Hemi. It's really a well-engineered piece of machinery. And all an engine is an air pump.
Right.
And it's a very efficient air pump. So if you can pump more air than the other guy, then you're probably going to make more power. And the Hemi was pretty good with that. So
now here's a question. Now the wire car, that was the first small block car, right?
Well, it was the first car that we were built to race. The yellow test car was the test car for the A engine. Yeah.
It says, Raging Bull, can you ask Joe, how did the W2 program come about?
Well, I can tell you what it meant to us. It was a matter of necessity.
Okay.
The W2 stuff was available at the point before we started the A engine program for the Pro Stock. So that's more of a John Worley question, who was the engine, Chrysler engine guy, and I mean Ted Spehar may know about that, but when we started the work with the A engine for Pro Stock, we were using W2 cylinder heads. We were using Trans Am blocks. We had our cranks built by they were billet crankshafts, and there was a guy here in Detroit that did all our crankshafts for us. But what we did is we took those W2 cylinder heads, and we even modified them further, especially on the exhaust port side. We changed that. We added a big, I think it was about a half-inch spacer to increase the size of the exhaust port. And then we could do a lot of porting on the exhaust ports as well. And a lot of stuff was moved around in those heads. The problem we had with the A engines back in '74 was that we were making enough power that we split the things right through the lifter bores and down through the cam valley, in the valley there. We'd split the blocks, and we broke a number of blocks. And as Mopar guys know, later on, certainly by the time that Bob Glidden ran the Plymouth Arrow in '79. They had come out with what they call the X block, which fixed all the problems that we discovered when you make a lot of power. And making a lot of power is great, but you got to have the things stay together too.
Now I got a picture of the intake ports. I'm pretty sure this is from Glidden's Arrow. I'll put it up here and see if you can see it up there.
Yeah, actually on my phone, I went the motor. Oh, I see it. Yep. The motor that is in the wire car is one of Bob Glidden's motors.
Okay.
It was purportedly the motor out of the car that ran at Pomona, but knowing Bob, he didn't go to Pomona with one engine. He probably had 2 or 3, and they were all probably a little bit different. So to say that that is the motor that won, I don't know, but it was one of the motors he had at Pomona. And that's what's in the wire car right now, because all ours were long gone. I think we broke everything we had in 74 testing. Ted was in the process of building more motors, but they wouldn't have had a very long lifespan. So you had to have a lot of them. And then the X block was developed, and that really did solve that problem. And you can make a lot of power with an X block motor.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Here's one for you.
That's my granddaughter.
Yep.
Love you too, Kelsey.
Mr. Pappas, do you still live in Michigan?
Yeah, absolutely. If you could look outside, you'd see about 6 inches of snow that fell in the last 48 hours. And it's snowing again. And I spent 4.5 hours trying to clean it between last night and this morning. So, yeah, I'm still in Michigan. I live outside of Howell, Michigan, out in the country, which is nice. And it's very quiet, and I got great neighbors, and it gets dark at night here. It's nice. Really, really nice. Yeah.
Anthony Icavino. Now he works at the Shelby Museum in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Tim, according to my 73 Racing Hemi manual, page 43, rod and main bearing clearances are 25 and 35, rod side 9 and 17. So
okay,
there you go. Let's see.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
This guy's from Australia. Greg, amazing memory, Joe. I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Dick Oldfield, God bless him, when he was alive, he died in 19. When we would go places, people would ask him a question. He turned to me and says, I don't remember. Joe, just tell him what the answer is. Yeah. And it seems like I have a good memory for some of the stuff. But yeah, I have a problem too with recent events. I think that's the aging process.
Now, how old are you, Joe?
I'm 74. I'll be 75 in May.
Okay. Still a young guy.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Now, I was reading about this, and it kind of brings in to light this. They were talking about the transmissions. Now, originally they were using torque flights with like 6 speeds or something I saw, and then they went to the Lenco.
All right.
Am I right?
No, that's not the progression.
Okay.
The 1970 car. Oh, there's our picture of Dick and I.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah, there's the good story. That was a 50s party that Dick and I attended in the 70s. And it was in the basement of Al Adams' home when he lived in Birmingham, Michigan.
Okay.
And just before Dick passed away, we recreated that picture.
Oh, wow.
I made him a big framed picture of that, and then we recreated it, and it's a cherished memory. I'll tell you, I miss that guy. Any rate, getting back to the transmissions, the original missile car, the 70 Mopar Motown Missile, was built with what is known as a clutch flight, which is a clutch actuated 3-speed torque flight. And they were moderately successful. The car itself was pretty fast, but the transmissions were an issue. The reason that car was started life like that is that Mr. Hoover's thought was the pro stock class was new in 1970, and to make it a really viable class, it was requiring a lot of guys from the super stock ranks and the stock ranks to get involved in pro stock. And many of these drivers were not really 4-speed guys.
Okay.
So Mr. Hoover thought it was a good idea to go ahead and to build the first car and develop the clutch flight for the guys that couldn't do 4 speeds.
Okay.
And it was kind of a so-so thing. All through 70, they really flogged it hard. They even built a multi-speed, like a 6-speed version, by bolting two back to back, and they were a lot of work. Let's just put it that way, and probably more work than they were worth. And at the end of 70, Ted hired Don Carlton to drive the car for 71. And Dick didn't have a problem with that. So Dick stayed on as the mechanic, and Don drove the car, but Don wanted a 4-speed in the car. Don was a manual guy, and the car, and running a test program, what you need is consistency. When you're working on trying to run an ABA type test with the instrumentation in the car, you need, consistency. So the 4-speed went into the 71 car. The 72 car also had a 4-speed in it, and a manual 4-speed, Chrysler 4-speed. Starting in 73, when the car was first tested in October, November of 72, it had a 4-speed in it from Butler's. But when I got on with the car in January 2nd of 73, the first thing that we did is ordered the Lenkos, because the Lenkos became, I don't know who was the first to ever use one in Pro Stock, but the 73 car had a Lenko in it from that point onward. And we learned a lot initially with the Lenko, and Dick liked them. So he did the transmissions, I did the rear ends, I did the motor work and the rear ends, and we both did the chassis and everything else. But he loved those darn Lenkos, and I just didn't like ATF. I still don't. But, Dick liked them, and they worked really, really well. So at that point, all the cars had Lenkos in them.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And almost when we showed up at Pomona, I'd say about a quarter of the field only had Lenkos. But by the time Gainesville rolled around, there was probably 60% of the cars had Lenkos in them. And certainly by mid-year, everybody was running a Lenko. No one had a manual in the car anymore. So, yeah, that's how that worked.
This is kind of interesting. Perry Ford, good to see you, Perry. Joe, how much did you know Jack Roush and Wayne Gapper? What kind of relationship did you guys have with the Ford guys, I guess?
Oh, well, they were good guys. They're from Michigan. Jack and Wayne both worked at Ford at the time. I don't think they had left Ford yet. They were, when I think, oh goodness, my earliest memory was of the Pinto, and they may have had a Maverick prior to that, but I don't remember for sure. You would probably know better than me on that. But I mean, these were guys we saw every week. I mean, every time you go race, you'd see them. And, while you race, you're big competitors. And after the race, we all go out to dinner together, because that's what we did. We stayed usually at the same hotels, and we all traveled in the same circle together. So, yeah, they were good guys. And I do remember at one point they had 2 cars, 2 Pintos. And those Pintos, I honestly, they scared me. They were crazy cars. And I know there was like a lot of those early Colts, there were wrecks. And I think the guys, either Wayne or Jack, wrecked a car one weekend, and man, they're lucky they're lucky well, what I know, Jack's still around. I don't know what Wayne's up to. I hope he's okay. I have not heard anything from him.
He died. Wayne Gap, I think, is dead.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure.
That's sad. They were both great, really nice guys. I mean, and then Bob Glidden was parked next to us at Indy the year he won Indy the first time. I think that was in '73. And he broke a rocker arm, and I remember Don went over and helped him fix it.
Really?
Yeah, we were parked right next to him. And we knew that we weren't going to win because, the car was, we had to weigh 7.25 pounds. And the Fords were really running well then. The Chevys were running better, and we couldn't match those speeds. So we knew that we were going to probably lose the next round because we had to race Billy Stepp in the next round.
Okay.
And that was a very controversial thing that happened that weekend. But any rate, bottom line is Don was helping
Glidden. Nice.
Glidden, and Bob won, and that was great. Dick and I left before the race was over because we did lose the next round, but it wasn't for not putting on a good show. We did that.
Jerry Whaley, Joe, back in the day, did you do any racing at Onondaga drag strip?
Onondaga. No, that's a drag strip here in Michigan. No, we didn't. When I was with Carlton, we only went to NHRA and IHRA national events. With Fonz, we did a lot of match racing all over the country.
Yep.
And we would race 2 to 3 times a week. It wouldn't be uncommon, but never, to my memory, went to Onondaga. Yeah.
There it is. Thank you. Joel Eaton, how about the Boss 429 versus the Hemi?
Well, at the time, I can tell you that the Hemi was a lot faster.
Oh, yeah.
This would have been 70, maybe early 71.
Yep.
And guys like Eddie Sharkman and Dino Don and
Sam Oxler.
Yeah. The 2 cars from Canada, Sandy Elliott cars. Yeah. They all were Boss cars, and they just couldn't quite match the speed and the ETs. Now, certainly those are cool motors. I got to tell you, I wish I had one sitting here in the garage just to look at. But they made a lot of power, but they didn't work well for these guys back in those days. They just didn't. They didn't make enough power. Let's put it that way. Or you couldn't get the power to the ground. And that's the difference between today's cars and the cars from those back then. Today's cars, all the pro stock cars, are very similar. They're either a Haas chassis or an RJ chassis or something like that. And they're all really, really good. And those cars, they can get the power to the ground. But back then, we didn't have the track prep. We didn't have the tires. We had power, but you can have all the power in the world. The big problem is getting it to the ground. And maybe that was part of the problem with the 429 cars. They just weren't getting the power to the ground. But the Hemi cars did. So
there it is. And I'm a Ford guy, and I know that the Hemi rules. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Just Mopar Joe. I talked to him today on the phone. He's got a great little YouTube channel you guys should check out. Hey, Tim and Joe, awesome Mopar legend. And it is. we are speaking to a legend, you know, and it's crazy when you think about it. It's all going away. The years are passing. Think about that, 1970. You know what I mean? Think about how long ago that was, and how times have changed in racing and engineering and everything. So it's great to hear where it came from. I think the most development was from like 69 to 81 for engines of all brands in those pro stock years. That's when they got what they got most out of everything. So thank you.
Those were good times. I mean, think about, the fields back in the early 70s. We would run a 32 car field in pro stock. Today you couldn't even get 32 cars to show up. They have a hard time now getting 16 some days, some weekends. And but there would be a variance of maybe almost half a second to a full second between the qualifying times. And now today you're down in the 10,000ths of a second for 16 cars. It's really changed. I don't know if it's for the better or the worse, but it's different. Let's put it that way. But the track prep is better. The cars are better. The tires are better. The drivers are phenomenal. So, and the equipment is good. Everybody's got good equipment. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mopar Joe. Daniel Wilson. Some of the names you mentioned are bringing back great memories. I'm in Atlanta, the big money match race capital. Since the statute of limitations expired, will you share your thoughts? That I don't know much about.
Well, we never bet on our own stuff.
Okay.
But there was a lot of betting that did go on.
Oh, yeah. Always in drag.
I mean, and I know that when I worked for Mike Fawns, he would sell his old race cars, and they all ended up on somewhere in New York on Long Island. They became street race cars.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of big money racing going on. There was a lot of betting going on here in Michigan as well. The cars, the street race guys like Jimmy Addison could make good money racing out on Interstate 696. There was an unused portion that was still under construction. There was a lot of big money races going on. Jim Wanger's having the Pontiac stuff.
Pontiac, yep.
There was just a lot of cars back in those days, and there was a lot of betting going on. But we never got in on it because we didn't have any money anyhow. Dick and I. It's hard to believe how little money we actually made in those days. I think I'll be doggone if I made $250 a week. That was probably a lot of money.
Yeah.
Wow. And I don't think I made that much back in those days. And I was living on my own, and which was probably pretty stupid. I probably should have just gotten rid of my apartment and parked my stuff at my mother's house, and because I was never home anyhow. But I was, I had a place of my own, and it didn't make much fiscal sense. But nonetheless, there was money to be made, but we didn't make it. You got to remember, NHRA, IHRA, none of those places paid much. And contingency money is what a racer would make money on if you were a racer. And you would see modified production and stock eliminator and super stock eliminator cars. They would have dozens and dozens of decals on the car. And then it was up to that person. If you won, you had to go try to collect all that money, all the contingency money. If you ever looked at a missile car, it had maybe 5 stickers on it.
Yeah.
And we were one of the first pro stock cars, not probably the first, but one of the early ones that actually had contracts with all those companies. And they paid up front at the beginning of the year a sum of money to have their name on the car.
Right.
be it trick titanium or the Leal eliminators or whatever. And the more money they paid, the bigger their name was on the car, right? So that's how, that's where our money came from, at least to run the car competitively. The stuff that we got paid from Chrysler paid all the other bills, and they paid, if we were going to go to California to race or to Florida to race, well, they combine a test, and so that they covered those costs.
Sure.
But if we were just going to go down to Indy for the U.S. Nationals, I don't think Chrysler paid a dime for that. So that came out of that money that we got from those upfront sponsors. But most people didn't have that luxury, but we only had their stickers on the car, and that's it. And those were not stickers; those were actually hand painted on the car, so they could be bigger than the normal sticker. Yeah.
Was it like put it this way? Was it like, hey Joe, I'm coming in. I got a whole bunch of, got a couple of motors with me. I got some rear ends, all from Chrysler. Did they just pour parts on you? Was it like you wrote a ticket? I need this, this, and this, and they went and filled it? How were those parts? What could you have? Anything you wanted?
Yeah. The simple answer is yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Because we ran the test program, so
Yeah.
Mr. Hoover
Yep.
would work with Teddy predominantly on the engine work. So whatever Teddy needed, all he had to do is call Schramm's, which was performance parts / direct connection, and go down and pick up the parts from the warehouse. And a couple times a year, I would go down with the transporter and pick up parts. Now, here's a for instance. Every year, I would build maybe a couple dozen clutches, okay, and a couple dozen rear ends of various, gear ratios. If I need, I just make a list, and we call Schramm's and say, okay, I need 24,
ringing pinions or whatever.
Green Yak clutches, and I need 12 557s. I need a dozen 586s. I need a couple of 514s. You need, whatever. You just get all the stuff you need, and whatever you need, Mr. Hoover or Mr. Maxwell would just sign off on, and they'd load it up, and off I go.
Nice. That's really cool.
If you needed a body, to make a car from, they get you a body. I can't tell you how many times I used to go down to Hamtramck Assembly in the morning. That's where they built the, this is before the Cadillac plant was there, for all you people that are all anxious to say that's a Cadillac plant now. It used to be that used to be a Dodge plant or a Chrysler plant where they build A bodies and E bodies. And if you needed bodies for something, you go down there at 5 a.m. and wait, and the millwrights would bring them down and load them on the trailer, and off you go. And they'd have no sound deadening, no seam sealers in them, and they'd just be bare bodies in white, and you could make race cars out of them. So
I love this stuff,
Yep.
David R., great program tonight. Welcome.
Okay.
Tim Connolly port heads for the race program.
Well, I think he did, but I don't know at what point. Tim did a lot of head work, and he actually, when I was at SVI in the 80s, Tim was there. He was still working at Chrysler, I think, and coming in at night and doing cylinder heads. But originally, I think our heads came from guys like Kenyon and others.
Mullen,
yeah. So that's where we got our heads originally. But Tim did a lot of work for the Chrysler race program a little bit later, I think. And I don't think I even met Tim until like 1980, late 80 or 81, when he was coming into SVI.
Joe, did you ever know Ron Whitson from Ford?
I don't think so. That name is not ringing a bell. So David Baxter, you better tell me who Ray was. Maybe I did meet him at some point. I just don't know. I don't think so.
Shane Gard, sensational. It is sensational. I mean, this is history. That's why I'm doing this channel, Joe. We talked about this before. You know, I want to bring back Pro Stock the way it was from those periods of time and get it on video, get it recorded as much as I can to the people that were there. Because this is like someone else said right here. Albert Rodriguez, Joe's a national treasure. All this stuff is a national treasure. This is our history of racing that we're never going to see again, you know? So I want to try to keep as much as I can in video or whatever, some kind of media, so we can look back on it, you know? So thank you for that. Ronnie Kirkpatrick, Joe and his lovely wife, Lynn, have been in my garage. It was an honor. I had Dick Oldfield there years before, looking at a few Carlton Hemis I have. Nice.
Yeah. Ronnie's a good guy. He's got some really interesting things, and he is a real, you know, he's pretty much a real Hemi guy. I mean, he loves anything with a Hemi, and he knows his stuff. Yep. If I have questions, I call him, and he was helping me with some welding questions I had when I was building some parts for my truck, because you know, when you don't do things for many, many years and you go back to it, you kind of forget on how to do stuff. And you know, I TIG and I MIG. Yep. And Ronnie's good. He's really an expert at both. So he helped me. So Ron, thank you for all that help.
Thanks, Ronnie, for the support. We had been talking about getting him on here. You know, like I told you before, I'm turning this up 100% now. That's why I already have people booked until in February to do this live chats. So yeah. I really appreciate it. Ronnie, you're going to be up there next. We'll talk about body work, paint work. Anything that happens in a garage is what my channel's about. You know?
Yeah, and Ronnie's in the process of restoring a very significant Pro Stock car from the 70s, one of Roy Hill's cars. Yeah. And I mean, that car is pretty doggone cool. I saw it last summer, and yeah, it's definitely way cool.
Thanks, Ronnie. Daniel Stuck, what involvement did Buck McCurry have in the performance side? He was an executive from Burnham, PA. He drove a 68 Hemi Charger home one time with AC, a car they didn't build. He left it. Never heard of the guy. Do you know who?
Yeah, you know, the name sounds familiar, but I can't tell you much about him. I just don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know. You know, believe it or not, I don't. Chrysler at the time had a lot of people, and there were individuals within the program, the performance group, that I never knew until later.
Okay.
And so it's not surprising that I don't know Buck. So sorry.
Now, David Baxter had talked about Ron Whitson, which you didn't remember, but maybe this will flash something back. He was a dyno guy, my cousin.
Oh, okay.
Kind of remember him now.
No, okay. It's not right, ringing a bell.
All right.
So, Dave, you stumped the chump, I guess. Oh, God, I love that guy.
Joe, I appreciate your honesty about the alleged match race betting conducted at unofficial venues like I-285 around Atlanta during its construction. Just another form of earning a few bucks.
That's right. I mean, that happened all over the country. If you guys have ever heard of, there was a group out of New York I think they lived in the Bronx or Harlem,
Okay.
Ronnie Lyles and Eugene Cord. They raced in pro stock. They had cars that they bought from Sox and Martin, and of course, Ronnie Lyles passed away. I think he had issues with diabetes, and he passed away a number of years ago. But Eugene just passed away this past year, and both those guys were they started life in street racing. They'd build cars or buy cars, and then street race and make big money. And Eugene tells a story of I guess we call it the $50,000 street race, and they won apparently. That's a lot of money, but the people that on Long Island and in New York that raced, man, they were serious. I mean, that's big money from the 70s. That's big money today. So that was a phenomenal amount of money. And of course, everyone's probably heard of Brooklyn Heavy. He used to buy Sox and Martin cars. And at one time, I think even Herb McCandless drove. I know Herb drove one of his cars for a while. And I think it was, I don't know if Heavy owned the car or was just paying to have his name on the car, but Herb was driving it. I do know that. Yeah.
Do you remember back on
race people? They were all street race people, and they're all over they're everywhere in this country. There was a lot of street racing going on. Florida, California, you name it. If there was a road and there was money and somebody had an ego, hey, you had fun, and you either went home happy or sad.
That's it.
Yeah.
Take your lunchbox and leave. So
you got that right.
When you were back in Woodward, let's say 70, those time periods, 70, 71, 2, 3, did you see like executives from Ford or Mopar, Chrysler, whatever, were they taking out hot cars at night to drive, or did they test stuff that you remember?
Did, but I didn't know it. I did once I started working for Fonz and stuff.
Yep.
Because Mr. Hoover had a car, and there were a lot of cars from GM people out there. But when I was younger, probably still in the late 60s, I didn't realize that a lot of those cars that you saw were engineers and people and executives that worked at the auto companies, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, all hitting the streets. And you get out there and you show your cars can do, and people notice that. And then maybe it doesn't account for anything, but it may account for somebody saying, hey, that Mustang or that Corvette or that Challenger was pretty darn fast. I should get one of those, and that may have accounted for something. But hey, at the very least, those guys had a lot of fun.
Man, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll button it up in a little bit, probably less than 10 minutes. That'll be 2 hours. People have kind of wound down on the questions. A guy that's local here, you may have heard of him before. His name is Dave Kofel.
Oh, yeah, Dave. Yeah.
So I live in Sandusky. He's got a shop probably 15 minutes away. I had him do some work one time. I really didn't. I mean, I've heard of Kofel's place. I really never knew much about him until I started getting into the Mopar thing. So I'm going to go down there and talk with him, because he was like, he made the B1 head. He got in. Where was he in the lineup of performance in Chrysler?
Well, Dave was an employee of the race. He was part of the race group, and the way I met Dave was by a total fluke. I was a kid riding my bicycle, and in Royal Oak, and there was this transporter, this race car hauler, with a funny car on the back of it called the Flintstone Flyer.
Yes.
And it was parked in a driveway of a house in Royal Oak. And I was like, I'm like 15 years old or, I don't have a driver's license. So I go over there, and I was a big avid reader of magazines, and I see this car, and I'm standing there in the driveway just oogling it. And this lady walks out, and it was Dave's wife. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And she was so nice. And I think Dave came out, and he introduced himself and told me a little bit about the car. And then a couple years later, several years later, I find out that I'm, working with Fonz, and the Chrysler liaison engineer for all the racers other than the Missile Group was Dave Kofel. Okay. And so many times we were at Dave Kofel's home, Dave and Susie Kofel. And I remember playing pool at their house. Butch, Leal, and I were playing pool. He cleaned me out.
He did.
Yeah. Butch is quite a golfer and quite a pool player, and he's a wonderful driver. I mean, he's a fabulous driver, and Butch and I are still great friends to this day. But yeah, the Kofels were great people, and still are. They still live down there. They're in their 80s somewhere, and they have the business, and they have an outlet here in Michigan called Kofel's Place 2, they call it.
Okay.
And one of the sons runs it up. One son is here, one son is down there in Ohio. So it's pretty cool. Dave's smart guy and very talented. And Susie is just a wonderful lady. And great people.
Well, I just took down two names, Dave Kofel. I'm going to get him, and then Butch Leal. I think I got to make a phone call to him. It'd be great to have him on here.
Yeah, we can arrange for something. Nice. I can get you a number for Butch. Okay. I don't have it in my phone, but I'll get you Butch's number. He's a yeah. I think 2 hours wouldn't be enough for Butch. You'll just get, in the first 10 minutes of his career. Butch has got stories for stories. Yep. He's the best storyteller and the best talker out there. So
nice.
He's a good guy.
We'll get him on here. Raging Bull, thank you. $10. How did the dual distributor and dual plugs come out?
Oh, well, that's simple. We had part of the race group involved a electrical guy that came to the race group from through Chrysler NASA program in Alabama. At they called it the Redstone Arsenal, I think, down there.
Okay.
And it was Ron Killen. And Ron was responsible for primarily, for anything electrical on the cars, but he built the computers. But one of the many things he was involved in is the crank trigger ignition.
Yep.
And the dual distributors and stuff, they came about because what you wanted to do is to get the most efficient burn you can in the cylinder. And running dual plugs, you could have a longer burn event in the cylinder, so that the burn would be more efficient, so to speak.
Yep.
Now, nowadays, it's really not that necessary with, MSD type ignitions, where you have a long duration anyhow of burn. But the dual distributor and dual plugs came about so that you could be more efficient, in essence.
Okay.
And so we did a lot of work with that. I mean, obviously, we used everything from Mallory mags to to make our own first dual distributors. We took a Hillborn fuel injection distributor, and where the fuel injection would run off at a 90-degree angle, we would build an adapter and put another head for the distributor up there, and so that we could run our own. So if you look at like the 71 car and the 70 car, that had the made up dual distributors, but by the time we got into 73 and such, I think we had distributors that were built by somebody else. I don't know if Axel had them yet,
Okay.
but they did later. I know that. And Axel was one of our major sponsors, so very well could have been an Axel distributor, but I don't remember. But they were tack drive, manual drive distributors, but with the dual heads on them, and it was all about this to increase the duration of the spark.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Albert Rodriguez, $10. Thank you for contributing to DBG. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Albert.
A lot of the subscribers on here, there's some Mopar people I can tell by reading the comments, but a lot of these guys may be my guys, which are more Ford oriented.
Yeah.
One of the things that you can say, and I'm telling you, that book is a must have, even if you're a Ford guy, just because it's the history. It's amazing. But if you think about it, we haven't even touched on this, but just think about the data logging that Killen did, with wheel speed, with, everything, temperature. I mean, they were doing data logging back then. It's just amazing what they had.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about that for a second, because it's pretty interesting, and certainly I'm not the expert, because I have trouble with my phone nowadays, and I got to call my granddaughter Kelsey to bail me out. But what Ron did is he built data acquisition system.
Right.
And it was not only used on our stuff, but it was used on Petty's cars and Harry Hyde's cars, because they all ran Mopar stuff back in the day. So it could be taken out of our car and installed in another car.
Okay.
And what it involved is we used transducers, which we would mount all over the car. For the missile car, you'll see sometimes pictures with a cable coming out of the front spindle and disappearing back underneath the car. And then you'll see one from the rear wheel coming out of the hub and disappearing back underneath the car, looping around. And they were connected to transducers, is what it was. And what we were measuring is wheel speed and slip. Okay. And then we'd have, we could monitor literally anything you wanted to monitor on the car, but we could only do it, I think it was either 6 or 8 channels that we could record.
Okay.
And what we did is Donnie would have a switch that he'd throw just before making a pass, and it would start the reel-to-reel recorder that was mounted in a box in the trunk, all on inner tubes, so it would be protected, and it would record 8 items, whatever they could be, pressures, volumes, you name it, and if it was a transducer, we could measure it. If we wanted to measure shock travel, we had transducers, linear transducers, to do that. So we would take all this data, and our purpose at Chrysler was to run engineering tests and to develop parts that Direct Connection could sell, and data that could be passed on to all the other pro stock Chrysler racers. And so that's what we did. So we ran ABA comparison tests. We would run a baseline, then make a change, document that, and then go back to baseline at the end of the day. Because we really need to know what's happening with, let's say, a camshaft. Because back in those days, there was a tremendous amount of camshaft development, as there is today. So, and we didn't do it on the dyno so much. We did it in real world settings.
Right.
So we would record that. After each run, the tape would be removed and taken over to the van that Killen and John Ballman shared, and they would plot it all on a strip chart recorder. And sometimes the plots would be 10, 15 feet long. And so they then interpret all the data manually. And we had a complete, very sophisticated weather station. And then we had correction factors for weather and humidity and everything that were all done by a gentleman by the name of George Wallace. George, not the governor of Alabama or Arkansas or wherever. George was a true scientist that worked for Chrysler. And he was part of the race group. And he developed all these correction factors that we used. And I think a lot of them are still in use. And so Mr. Hoover, Mr. Coddington, Al Adam, John Ballman, and Ron Killen would all get together and they'd interpret all this data. And then we'd know for sure in a very sanitary way if this camshaft or this air dam or this aero trick that we did was of any benefit at all. And the data would speak for itself. And then every week that data went out. And if the parts were good, we'd say, hey, use this camshaft, or use this chin spoiler that we just developed, or this hood scoop configuration, or hey, we did something, we ran spark loops and we found that if you gap your plugs a particular way and you set your distributors this way, you're going to make more power. So, I mean, that's what we did. And we did that 5 days. Well, we did it maybe 3 to 4 days a week, but from here in Michigan from April through October, and then California in January, February, March was spent in Florida, and it was then back to Michigan. So, I mean, we ran that was our job, to run a test program. And by the way, we could go race some races. So.
It can't get any better than that. Well, Ronnie Kirkpatrick, 99.99. Thank you, Ronnie.
Hey.
I appreciate that with all my heart. It's definitely going to be.
He's a gentleman.
He is. Very
he's
good.
He's a true gentleman. Yeah.
Yes. Thank
he's
you.
A good guy.
And your granddaughter says happy to be your IT support.
Yep. Thank you, Kelsey. Appreciate it. Good Lord. I don't know what I'd do without my 2 grandkids. They're both really smart, and God bless them.
Amen. So this is what he said. Kelsey, tell Grandpa to come to PA and he can build a Cobra out of aluminum.
Oh, yeah. That's I'd rather work on some, maybe help Ron with that Roy Hill car. So, we'll get busy on that.
Well, what we're going to do, I'll feature that on one of my videos because today I was collecting the racing video of Roy Hill's car. That thing was cooking on a couple runs I have recorded. So we'll put that together, and then I'll get Ronnie's pictures of his restoration of it, and we'll kind of put it together and make a great little video history of that
Terrific.
car.
Terrific.
Now, he told me that car was spraying at one time. They found nitrous in it.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. I know Roy pretty well, and God bless him. He's a great guy. And what people don't understand about those days of pro stock, and up through the time when the whole thing kind of blew up in front of the Alderman and
Alderman, yeah.
That almost every pro stock car had nitrous at one point or another. I guarantee it. I stake my reputation.
Give me a time frame.
Well, from the mid to late 70s onward, up until what I don't even remember the year that Jeffrey on and those guys. I mean, you're talking about a 10 or 15 year period, but I mean, especially when it came to match racing, because you usually just decide we're going to run 7 pounds or 6 pounds, 6.5 pounds, or and you match race. But nitrous was used a lot. There were other additives tried by different people.
Yep.
But nitrous is cheap and cheerful, I'll tell you, and it makes power. And I think Ron and I were talking about this just today, maybe or something. And it was I think it was the use of nitrous was pretty prolific for years. And Ekman got caught, and he got a lifetime ban for just a stupid mistake. But I think it was out there for a long time, and people just didn't realize it. I had many conversations with Regis Gully, who owned Trick Titanium. I used to go there at least once a week, all the way through, up and through the early 2000s. And he would tell me that guys would be, they would be having their titanium cans reserted, and there'd be holes drilled for the nitrous lines, and this pro stock guys. And, if you can hide it from NHRA or IHRA or whoever you're racing with, more power to you. And a lot of them were very good at hiding it. And I heard stories that just would, I assume they're true because I believe the people that told me, but they do all kinds of crazy things. The way they delivered the nitrous to the engine.
Oh, sure.
From a hidden bottle in the car, or strapped to their leg. As a matter of fact, a couple of pro stock drivers would strap a small nitrous bottle to their leg. Are you kidding me? Just crazy.
Well, I had Rusty Glidden on here. He's a buddy of mine, and we talked about that story, about the nitrous story with them. So I'll put a link on this video if you guys want to watch that. He tells the real story. There's lots of different versions. He tells you the real story of why and how they did it.
Yeah.
And Eichmann, his was in an oil tank, I think, in the car. It blew up at Columbus National Trail. In the oil tank in the back of the car, blew up right in the pits. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I think.
Yeah, and somebody had a tank roll away from it fell off the back of the back of the truck, and it rolled out into the aisleway where the fans are. It's like, are you kidding me? How stupid!
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty crazy. But hey, nitrous is a cool way to make power. I highly recommend it.
Listen, when I was a kid in '80, I built a Cleveland, my first engine in '81. I was 16. So Mike Thermos was a big nitrous guy back then. And I had called him up on the phone. I told him what I was doing. He said, yeah, I can sell you a good kit, 125 horsepower. I said, okay. I saved up. I bought it. My car went from 1336 to 1185.
There you go.
On the street, man, that thing was like a killer. It was awesome. I love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it serves its purpose, and it's been around for a very long time. Yeah. And, I mean, it was used in aircraft, and then, it's used in
the Germans used it to help the big bombers take off. The Germans, I think, are initially that used it to help the big bombers take off because they were so heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. They needed more power. Yeah.
Warren Johnson has a quote he told me the other day when I was talking to him. You can't have too much money, too much power, or too much loving.
That's right.
So something to live by.
Yeah, you got it. All right.
We've been here for 2 hours and 9 minutes. So that's an excellent time. We talked about that. We said we're going to try to cut it off around 2 hours. 81 people here. So this is going to get around. I posted all over Facebook. You
Terrific.
put on some of your areas. We've talked now about some of the other people that I want to get on here. So Joe's going to be nice enough to help me with that. And I'm telling you, we're going to bring this history back, and it's going to be all recorded on video.
Terrific.
So I ask you guys to please like and subscribe to my channel. Help me build this channel. Share it with your buddies. And with that, we can bring back other people and keep Pro Stock alive and well. So I guess we'll end it there, Joe.
Terrific.
All right. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Thank your family, my family. It's awesome. And your granddaughter, Ronnie, Albert Rodriguez, everybody, Daniel Wilson, the contributor. I appreciate that, guys. I really do.
Terrific.
Stay tuned to DBG because you know what? You're always going to learn something new. Trust me.